Wais mentioned earlier that a lot of different companies have lost some percentage of their revenue, some small percentage, and some of them a massive percentage to almost everything. Let's just maybe kind of like think of like, what are the best approaches to going about cost cutting? Wais, would you be able to jump in on that? Like, how do you go about figuring out how to cut costs best if your revenue has dropped significantly?
Cool heads are basically needed, and you can't cut. There's an option that, or risk that you might cut too deeply, and you want to avoid that. For example, we've seen some companies cutting their sales and marketing expenses completely, but you still, while you're trying to bring in sales, you can't cut it off completely. You might need to be a little bit more smarter about how you have those sales and marketing expenses, but you still need to have some level of sales and marketing expenses. And the other option is also not cutting all your staff, because the cycle turns, and when the cycle does turn, you're going to need your strong employees, and if they're not there, if you've already retrenched them, then you won't be able to, your business value will decrease because of it.
No, definitely. I think salaries is then also a big component for most companies in terms of, looking at the income statement. Salaries will generally be a very big percentage of it all. Johan, we've seen a wide array of different salary cost cutting approaches out there. What have you seen implemented in the market that has worked well?
Yeah, I think it really depends on obviously the market where you operate. So I've seen, especially your lower income workers that's working on a per time, per hour based billing that can't come to work, especially in the hospitality traveling industry, that's, obviously their business is completely decimated almost in this time period. So a lot of bigger retrenchments actually happening in that area, whereas on your services sector, which the biggest cost element on the financial statements or on the income statement is generally the salaries component. So there's not a lot of levers that's available to them to pull. So it stays one of the, I think, quicker, more effective ways to help navigate or see how you can stop the bleed. But there's also a lot of funding opportunities or relief funding opportunities, especially for salaries. So I think it's communication is key with all the stakeholders and with staff, managing the expectations, and then to see what can be leveraged in terms of relief funding.
Definitely. Very keen to get into that conversation under the next subsection. I think there's some golden nuggets in there. So we've mentioned companies who've been really hit hard, like lost the bulk of their revenue, some guys all of their revenue. And we're not perfectly sure like how long that will be the case. Like how long will it take before tourism starts getting back, as an example, or before events are opened up, etc. Bazan, is there ever a time to kind of call it quits, to say, look, we've tried everything we can, we cannot cut costs below zero. If we've got no income coming in and we've run out of runway, is there a right time to kind of give up and call it quits and close the business?
I think, unfortunately, there probably is. I wouldn't like to call it giving up. I would like to look at it from a perspective of maybe a strategic review, a strategic detour as such. But I think if you see in the short to medium term that you are really just going to incur cost and very little income is coming in, and it doesn't really make sense to put your staff on short time, for a few months, then it's probably the right time to liquidate as such, and to liquidate your assets and make sure that you actually take what you can get, if I can put it that way. By means of an example, I had a client who is in the media and events industry. It's very clear that in the medium term, even for the next 6 months, they won't be getting a lot of revenue in. And they, unfortunately, after 8 years of trading, decided to make the decision to close their doors. And for them, they did it really from a perspective of take what they can get now and reassess and see what they're going to restart in a few months' time. Because the idea is definitely to create a version 2 of what they're doing now. But right now, for them, for the company, and for staff, they felt that was the best thing to do.
That's interesting. I've seen a few entrepreneurs who've, when the company absolutely can't operate, they do start something else right now. They can operate and take advantage of this current scenario. just as a, as a side project to help them generate some revenue and use their resources temporarily, with the idea that, they've leaned down the main business, and if it bounces back, it can scale up again. If it doesn't bounce back, it is at a point where costs are cut to a point where they could potentially then close that down. And if their new project then has generated significant enough traction, they can probably then start running with that business. So, kind of pivoting completely between industry and product offerings in totality. If that's the case, I guess, entrepreneurs are a resilient species altogether. So you kind of make plans and try to take opportunities that arise. In that process, if it's going hard, let's say we're not going to close, a company's not going to close their doors yet, but they are incurring losses. Guys, is there like an acceptable amount of losses to incur, an acceptable amount of debt to take on? I'll put this to the floor. What do you guys think?
I think it's a bit tricky. I suppose for me, it's important to have a cash flow forecast in place so that you can at least try and predict where, if you have an idea of when your next revenues can come in and how much money you need to get yourself to that point where your revenues start coming in. And the only way to do that is start planning your cash flows. I think it's a very valuable tool to have to decide what to do next.
Definitely. I almost don't know how, without a very, very detailed cash flow for the next 6 to 12 months, how a business owner can really make a decision right now in terms of when and how deep to cut, what decisions to make in terms of, staffing choices and things like that. So I think, one of the most important tools in your pocket right now is probably a proper cash flow forecast that you can scenario play, and that you can figure out how to make the best decisions that are possible. I'm looking for a story of an entrepreneur that's managed scaling down quite well. Johan, I think you mentioned having a story like that.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a client that actually the moment that the lockdown started, or even just slightly before that, he immediately contacted us and says he needs a strategic partner as well to guide him through this. So we put some strategy time aside, and we, looked at exactly what is happening in the business. We critically evaluated every cost line. We see all the financing that he had from the different sources, how we could consolidate it into a better rate. Obviously applied for relief funding, as well as specific relief requests to, etc., like the landlords. We made a plan as well for the salaries, but luckily our efforts has helped us to not cut that as of yet, even though that option still exists. And also a plan to entice debtors to pay their funds quicker. So I think it was a quick solution, or a quick effort to quickly stop the bleed and get a plan in action as quickly as possible.
Hey, Lau here, one of the founders of Outsourced CFO. If you enjoyed this video, make it official. Click subscribe.